about is those two women and why Joe is so desperate to avoid them. Pointing a suspicious finger at Lula, Joe glares in Susan's direction. How long have you two been together? Watching Leanne disappear out of sight, Joe slides around to the empty seat by Susan's side. He's got a bone to pick with her, and he's going to pick it. What the hell? Joe exclaims, sitting beside her with a face like thunder. Susan looks unimpressed and frankly unenthused by Joe's approach. Like he's a spy in one of those old movies, Joe looks left and right before speaking again. You have a girlfriend? Joe explodes, throwing his arms up into the air. So what? Susan tuts. You have a girlfriend too. Yes, Joe says, pausing for only a moment. You knew that. I have a picture of her on my desk, for crying out loud. Joe then lowers his voice. Since when did you like girls? That's none of your business, Susan barks, crossing her arms. Let's be serious here, Joe. You weren't looking for love or marriage with me. You were just looking for a quick office hookup. Joe folds his arms and mirrors Susan's body language. Which is totally fine with me, she continues, leaning forward and taking Joe's hand. As long as it gets me that promotion a little bit faster, I'm game. She then smiles mischievously. Besides, while I love Lula's little purple friend pleasing me, there's no substitute for the real thing every once in a while. Joe is gobsmacked by Susan's frankness. So you're only going out with me for a promotion? He asks fearfully, having had his masculinity battered in the last few hours. Of course, silly, Susan giggles, reinforcing the businesslike relationship between them. What? She chuckles. Did you really think I liked you? Joe opens his mouth to say something, but he can't bring himself to speak. As wig hair falls in front of his eyes, he can feel his confidence as a man withering every second. Oh, shit! You really did! Susan contemptuously laughs in his face. Being her boss, Joe's mind instantly turns to disciplining her. He then looks at her face, and to his surprise, she scares him. You're... Susan says, putting her forefinger to her cheek as though she is trying to think of the right word. Joe flinches as she touches him. Then her smile turns evil, and she finishes her sentence with bite. Pathetic. Joe reaches instinctively for the drink in front of him on the table. There is about an inch of clear liquid in the glass, and he downs it in one big gulp. He instantly regrets his action. What he thinks is sparkling water turns out to be pure vodka. Joe's throat burns, and he begins to cough. Hey, that's mine, Susan groans. But then remembers Lula and Leanne will soon return with more drinks, so she just shrugs. As Joe continues to recover, Susan begins to look him over. I have to admit, boss, she smirks, you look damn fine as a woman. Joe stares daggers at her. What? I'm serious, she giggles, looking at him like he's a tasty candy. You're sort of an okay-looking guy, but you're hot as a woman. She finger-walks her hand across the table and takes hold of one of Joe's. Now that I know you're into cross-dressing, maybe we can be more than office friends with benefits, she remarks, inspecting Joe's freshly painted nails. Joe pulls his hand out of her grasp. I'm not a cross-dresser, Joe explains in desperation. I'm only in this getup because of you. How so? Susan asks, her curiosity piqued. I bought you some sexy underwear. Joe sighs, unhappy he's the one wearing it. I wanted it to be a surprise, so I sent it to my place. And Leanne intercepted it, Susan says, quickly understanding. I tried to tell her it's for her, Joe continues, only to be cut off by Susan. It won't have been in her size, Susan smiles, so she asked questions. Joe huffs, getting frustrated they don't have long to talk. I had to think fast. Something you've never been great at, Susan mumbles under her breath. So I told her I bought them for me. Joe finishes, having heard her snide comment, but choosing to ignore it. Okay, that explains the lingerie. She takes his hand again. But what about the dress, your hair, and your nails? All Leanne's idea, Joe answers. Right, Susan replies skeptically. Once I said I was a crossdresser, she just kept pushing more and more until I was, Joe says, looking down at himself, wearing all this. Gosh, you are such a wimp, Joe, Susan scolds with disgust sneaking into her tone. Her eyes then suddenly brighten and she asks, or is it possible you kinda like it? What? Maybe you kinda like it, she repeats. How does that sexy silk feel? I bet it feels good. The question takes Joe by surprise. He's spent the entire night trying to convince Leanne that he likes wearing women's clothes, so he's taken no time to question how it actually makes him feel. Joe thinks for a minute. He runs his hand up and down the seam of the dress. Joe admits to himself that it does feel kinda good. So, what's the verdict? Susan asks, tilting her head to the side with a silly grin. Joe can't think of a safe answer. He blushes and looks away. OMG! Susan giggles like a teenager. You're defo a sissy. What? No! Joe says, backpedaling. I hate this stuff. Liar, Susan accuses. You like it. You love it. Don't look sad about it. Josie is so much cuter than boring old Joe. How many times do I have to tell you? Joe barks, swiftly standing to hike up his dress so she can see the panties he'd bought for her to wear. I bought this stuff for you! Caught with his skirt lifted in the air, Joe freaks as Leanne appears from the crowd and loudly gasps. I knew it! Leanne yells, holding drinks in her hand. I can explain, Joe replies, bashfully lowering his dress. Standing next to Leanne, Lula looks just as angry. She glares at Susan with fury in her eyes. Him? Lula asks, glancing at Joe. Your boss? Again? Settle down, Lula, Susan replies, casually brushing it off. The truth! Leanne shouts with more venom than a cobra in her voice. You promised you wouldn't do this anymore, Lula says emotionally. What? Susan questions, getting to her feet. I didn't ask him to buy me anything. Right, Lula sobs in disbelief. This is just like before. Before? Joe yelps, looking at Lula. Not that it's any of your business, Lula responds in irritation. But Susan and I were separated for a while 7 years ago when I caught her sleeping with her boss and his wife. That was totally not my fault, professes Susan. Yeah, right, Lula replies, throwing a drink in Susan's face. We're done, you cheating rat! Lula storms off and Leanne's face drops. Cheating? She mumbles to herself, looking in Joe's direction. You lying little shit! You brought those panties for her, didn't you? Not giving Joe a second to answer, Leanne follows Lula's lead and throws both drinks in Joe's face. Don't come home tonight! We're over! Susan turns to Joe as Leanne storms off and she shakes her head. Idiot. Grabbing her handbag, she runs after Lula, shouting, Baby, please, wait! I only did it for us! I mean, how could I ever like such a wimp? Joe's legs buckle as he sits down hard in the booth. The alcohol drips down his face and into his already stinging eyes. On his lips, he tastes the makeup running down his face. For a moment, Joe's senses go numb. The music just becomes thundering in his ears as his entire life falls apart around his high heels. Here you go, a familiar voice says, offering Joe a hand towel. Joe takes the proffered towel and wipes his face. The taller woman from before sits in the booth across from him. Well, that was embarrassing, she says, stating the obvious. You think? Joe rudely agrees. No need to be touchy with me, she says in a calm, comforting tone. Sorry, it's just I don't know how I'm getting home, Joe whines, throwing the paper towel angrily to the floor. She's got the keys to my car. I'm Clarice, by the way. She introduces herself and extends her hand to Joe. I think we should probably go outside. Thinking he has nothing to lose, Joe follows her out. He can feel the eyes watching him as they head for the exit. The cold of the nighttime air cuts straight through him as he slowly waddles behind Clarice. He looks at several corners in the alley as they walk and wonders if any of them would be a good place to spend the night. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," says Clarice. "Hell of a hatching day, huh?" What?" Joe asks, wondering where he could find a change of clothes. "Coming out?" Clarice explains, pointing at a small car in the distance. "I'm not coming out," Joe clarifies, hating every click of his heels against the solid ground as he walks. "Then that's a waste of such lovely legs," Clarice says, looking back and down at his pins. "Is it?" Joe snaps, blushing hard. "Do you believe in serendipity?" "I can't help but wonder if the universe is trying to tell you something," Clarice says. "I'm sorry," Joe says, shaking his head, "but I still don't understand." "I know dressing like a woman wasn't on your to-do list this morning," she says with a smile, "but I overheard your girlfriend talking at the bar. She was singing your praises. She was saying to the other woman with her that she's proud of you." "Proud?" Joe asks, not sure if she is putting him on or not. "Yep," she replies as they approach her car. "You should fight for her. I know I'd want you to fight for me." "I can't," Joe replies, deflated and broken. "I've lied to her too much. I doubt I could even look her in the eyes." "Easy," Clarice laughs, opening the passenger side door. "Stop lying and start appreciating what you have." "I'm not sure," Joe replies, feeling the soft material of his dress to avoid looking Clarice in the eyes. "Let me tell you something," Clarice says sternly, leaning on the open car door. "You might regret the things you've done to this point, but I'm a firm believer that you regret the things you don't do more." Joe looks inside Clarice's dirty car and frowns. It's nothing like his very clean and very posh car. "What are you saying?" he asks, hesitating at the risk of getting his dress dirty. "I'm saying," Clarice smiles, gesturing for him to get inside, "that I'm going to take you back to her, and you should do everything you can to win her back." "What if she says no?" Joe asks, fearing the worst. "Then she says no," Clarice laughs, letting go of the door to move around to the driver's side. "Then at least you've tried, and the only regret you'll have is not treating that saint of a woman right." "Saint?" Joe grumbles, carefully lowering himself into the car. Clarice throws herself into the driver's seat and slams the door closed. Turning to Joe, she gives him a wide smile. "Absolutely a saint," she replies. "My wife left me when she found out about me. I'd have killed to be with a woman like her." Joe looks down at himself and touches the material of Leanne's dress. Every single scenario he can think of with Leanne ends badly. But his heart can't help but agree with Clarice's words. "Please," Joe says softly, "take me home."